UX. It is Thursday, February 27th, 2020, and welcome to episode 21 of the podcast. We have the fantastic Michele Ronsen back with us after her great appearance in episode 3. I am a little bit sick. I keep coughing. I'm going to mute myself if I end up in a coughing fit. I'm also in Rome Airport. Magically, Rome has become the center of coronavirus. Italy has become the center of coronavirus since I was here 5 days ago. So I've got my mask just in case. That's not my style. Excuse me. I sound like a dog who's been chain smoking. So I'm going to throw it over to Michele so she can introduce herself to you in case you're not familiar with her. You definitely want to follow her on LinkedIn. You want to join her mailing list. And I'm going to open up all the chat windows and then we'll get started. Michele.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you for having me again. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm in San Francisco. It's a beautiful day here. As Debbie mentioned, I'm a user researcher. I've known Debbie for, quite a while now through LinkedIn. We actually haven't met in person, but we should do that one day soon. Note to self, book a trip to Italy.
Yes, come visit me and write it off as a business trip.
Absolutely. I am a recovering designer, and I moved into user research about 8 years ago, and it is absolutely one of my true passions. And I've also been an educator in the design and research space for over 20 years. My latest endeavor is called Curiosity Tank, and you can learn more about us at curiositytank.com. We offer both user research consulting as well as resources and education to help what I refer to as aspiring, temporary, and accidental researchers improve their skill sets. So I'm delighted to be here today and answer questions about how to conduct studies, what to look for, pitfalls, and things like that.
Yeah, we've got an hour, so we'll get through as much as we can. And this podcast came out of someone coming to my office hours, which I do live every Tuesday at about 6 p.m. Italy time. So it's Ask Me Anything. And someone said, how do I plan testing? And I said, let's bring in the big guns, and that's you. So let's imagine that we've got a project where we're working. We know we want to test it because I always say testing is the QA of UX. We don't want to put something out there without it being tested. You wouldn't want to put out code without it being QA'd. So where do we start and how do we start?
Sure. So I ask myself two questions whenever a new project or a new client comes my way. And the first is, what are we looking to learn? And that might sound really basic, but I want to know from the entire stakeholder team, what are we looking to learn and are we on the same page? Because if the question is, how do we improve this onboarding process, or should we implement this feature, or why did this metric go up or down, or whatever the question is per se, most likely the different stakeholders on the team are going to have different backgrounds and different perspectives and different interpretations on that question. So likely there's going to be a product manager or a designer, or maybe someone from customer support or experience. I'd like to get those people all in the room and get on the same page with, what do we really mean? What are we really after? And then once we understand what we're really looking to learn, the next question is, how will the learnings be applied? And by that, I mean, what will we do as a result of this study? So I want to understand those two buckets first. And ideally, what we want to learn is going to be directly connected to a business goal or a business metric, a KPI, an OKR, whatever your organization calls it. I want to make research everybody's goal also. The more invested I can have these stakeholders in the process, the more likely I know the study will be successful. So I would say how to start, get your core stakeholders in a room and truly understand and define what are you looking to learn, and make sure that you're aligned on those perspectives. Your developer is going to have a very different perspective on what success is going to look like and why he or she wants to answer that question than your designer. And nobody's right or wrong. You want to take advantage of that like beautiful brain trust in the room. So what are you looking to learn and how will the learnings be applied? If you can't answer those two questions, do not proceed. Like, don't do it. Don't do it.
Sorry, I was muted because there's airport announcements here. So then thinking about the idea of a study, I know that obviously it's going to vary based on project to project, but how do you decide the best methods?
That's a great question. So the first two questions I asked myself are where are we in the process and what are we looking to learn? So by where we are in the process, I mean, where are we in the product development or service development process? Are we at the very, very beginning stages where we're looking for a foundational awareness or foundational knowledge, or do we already have something for someone to provide feedback on? Has the concept or the idea already been formed enough where we can actually have someone evaluate it? Or at the end of the spectrum, is this something that's already living? Is this something that is already in a functioning format? Maybe it might be a high fidelity prototype or something that's already out there in the wild. So by understanding where we are in the product development process, that's immediately going to help me understand what type of research we're going to conduct, whether it's formative or evaluative. I'm sorry, formative, generative, or evaluative. Where are we on that scale? And then the next question I want to ask is, what are we looking to learn? And that ties to the earlier conversation. By understanding what we want to learn, that is going to narrow down what the best methods are going to be for that particular question at hand. People tend to, or my work tends to focus around 7 questions, if you will. And I can come in anywhere in the process, but they're usually a variation of 7 questions. The first being, what should I build? Right? So there's a company or a person that has an idea that they are uniquely suited to fill a particular gap or take advantage of a particular opportunity. And they have an idea, but that could take many forms. The second question is, am I building the right thing? So there's many ways to solve the problem, right? There's many ways to skin the cat, if you will. And the third question is, am I building the thing right? Right? So there's a very, kind of nuance between, am I building the right thing and am I building the thing right? And then after that, it's, who are my customers? Not demographically, but really like, how do they think? How do they feel? What are their attitudes? What are their behaviors around this industry, around this problem space, et cetera? And it goes on from there. Why did this metric go up or down? Should we implement this feature? And it usually ends with something along the lines of, can you teach my team how to do what you do? Can you teach me to do what you do? So that's where I started to develop these tools. And there's a great tool on my website called How Do I Research Blank? And it's a totally free resource. You can go to curiositytank.com/resources and download it. And it will walk you through sort of like a step tree of how to diagnose the best potential methods for your question, depending upon where you are in the process.
Excellent. Thanks for making that resource available to everybody.
Uh-oh, you're breaking up for me.
I guess something that dumb. I know some of these answers, but sorry, I'm doing my best here. Can you still get me?
Yeah.
Oh, it says my internet is unstable. Story of my life. So I was saying that I'm just, I know the answers to some of these, but I want to hear your answers. So I'm throwing these questions at you. So tell me about research plans. Do we need one? How do you document it? How do you write it? Do you have more tools or resources around that?
I do. Okay. So yes, you need a research plan. You need a research plan for so many reasons. You need a research plan to organize your own thoughts as the kind of stakeholder herder, if you will, or the feral cat herder. Remember, you're going to work with your stakeholders to identify what you want to learn and how those learnings will be applied. After that is when you start to begin the research plan. And the research plan is really a living document to help you organize and update not only the discussions and the decisions that are being made, but to gain buy-in along the way. So you're going to use the plan before the study to help prepare, to organize, to discuss, and to evolve, to document the key questions, et cetera. And you're also going to use it during the study. It's like the spinal cord of your project, if you will. But it's a very living, breathing document. They don't have to be super fancy. They don't have to be super long. But again, it's a spinal cord. It's a way to keep everybody on the same page. And it's also a way for the person conducting the research to make sure that they're actually answering the questions that they set out to ask. So you're going to refer to it while you're conducting the study too, to make sure that you're actually answering those questions. I mean, a lot of times it's kind of like the trees through the forest. You can't see it anymore. And your research plan will help keep you honest there. You're also going to use it to manage expectations and to manage scope. And then after the study, you're going to refer to it again to make sure that you are delivering on what you said you were going to deliver. You're going to make sure that you're actually answering the questions. You're providing the deliverables in the format that was agreed upon. And with everybody updated along the way, there should be no surprises. Again, when you make research everybody's goal and you include them in the planning and update them, as the planning is evolving, you're going to have a better chance, or your success rate of moving from insights into action is going to be much greater. So yes, you need a plan. Absolutely.
And then what kind of information is in the plan? I guess it might be obviously what you're looking to learn, who you're going to observe or talk to or do something with, and how you're going to do it. So what kinds of things in general tend to end up in the plan?
So a very, very basic plan would be an outline of what you just included, what your big questions are, how those learnings will be applied, the methods that you will use to gather that information, who you will talk to, a loose timeline, and loose deliverables.
Sounds loose. Okay, so
That
now,
minimum, I should say minimum. I mean, some plans could be 4 or 5 pages.
sure. So one thing that I want to ask you about is I've had a few people ask me in my office hours, and I know it happened at the job I was at, where there weren't a lot of researchers at the company, and the company didn't want to invest in more researchers. And what they thought was retrofit other people. Like,
Mhm.
go get product managers, give them 1 hour of training, literally 1 hour of training, and then allow them to do some research or testing. Where is this a good or bad idea? Where does this work for UX? Where does this make UX look like anybody could do it and we're not so special? But
Right.
what's the pros and cons of kind of trying to train up some of your coworkers to do UX research?
So I think that there's more pros than cons to this. And this is why, largely in part, why I created Curiosity Tank. I think that there is an enormous need, again, for what I call these aspiring or temporary or accidental researchers to gain the education and the information they need. And there's not a lot of places to go. And I hope to fill a small portion of that gap with my direct classes and workshops. I think it's great that people are becoming more aware of the benefits that user research can provide. Um, I would love to know what they cover in that hour. I mean, that's a lot of information in an hour. But I think that user research as a practice is very iterative and experiential. And I think that you become better with time and with practice. So, my advice or encouragement would be, remember, we're all researchers. We all have that ability. We all conduct research in some way, shape, or form. For the last time we, purchased a plane ticket, we probably did a little bit of comparison shopping. The last time, when we go out to evaluate whether or not we need a new washer and dryer or we should just fix the one that we have, there's research involved, in all of that. But the study of user research is really formalizing that kind of evidence-based, structured approach. And I would suggest you seek out experts, and learn from people who have industry experience, and keep at it. Do the best you can until you know better, and then do better.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I would have to say I see pros and cons too, but I'm always worried about that everyone's a designer and everyone's a researcher, where suddenly it's like, oh, we don't need Michelle's. We don't need to bring in people like that. We'll just make the product manager a researcher. And I sometimes feel like I know sometimes that's the only thing a company will do. So you're stuck with it, and then hopefully they're coming to you and they're getting smarter. But I sometimes worry that it hurts our specialty a little bit. Am I just being oversensitive?
I think that there's no right or wrong. I would rather have people ask a question and get some feedback than not get any feedback at all. And
Sure.
I believe that, incremental baby steps, the first time you ask a question, maybe it might be leading or maybe it might be biased. The second time you ask a question, you're going to be a little bit better. And the third time you're going to get better and better. So I think it's really based on hands-on experience and practice, and everyone has to start somewhere, and there's just a huge gap. So I don't think we can blame the companies. There's a huge gap, and people are realizing the value more. So as the community comes together, and you and me and Allie and Joe and all the people kind of in our community that are looking to upskill and elevate, I think we're going to do it together. And I think that I truly think the world will be a better place when we learn to ask better questions.
Yes.
But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. I would rather have somebody ask a question and try than not ask at all.
Okay, super. Thank you. So, thinking about other people on teams who are often collaborators on our research, even if they're not doing the research, because ultimately, if you have those specialist UX researchers, chances are they're planning, they're executing, they're interpreting, and then just they're collaborating with others. So, what's the best way to collaborate with stakeholders who probably either want to be really uninvolved and hands off or maybe too involved?
Right. So I'm a huge collaborator. I think the number one indicator of success for me that a study will be successful is how engaged my stakeholders are. So I think it's hugely important to include them. No one's going to reject their own work. So the more we include them and the more we can benefit from that cross dialogue and those different perspectives, the better positioned we will be to produce a study that actually has actionable outcomes. So I think it's hugely important. And again, it starts with that very beginning step. What do we want to learn, and are we all on the same page with what that question means? And then how will these learnings be applied?
Yeah, I think one thing I hear a lot from people, and maybe you do too, is my stakeholder says we don't have to do too much research. We know our customers. We know what they want. Are there a good set of pre-made arguments or something that you can give the podcast listeners to what to say when you have a stakeholder who maybe is thinking more about slicing budgets and time than about the quality and depth of things?
Yeah, I think it's good to do your own little mini research to find out what that barrier is. And if is it time? Is it money? Is it ego? Is it something else? Right. So I would find out what the history of research is in the organization. I'd find out what that actual barrier is. And then I would build a plan to address that particular barrier. If money is very different than time, is very different than ego. If it's money, then I would find a way to propose a plan that didn't include any sort of exorbitant fees, and maybe it's some very simple usability testing or some guerrilla research. If it's time, I would build something that can be turned around in 48 hours, or less, ideally. And if it's ego, that's a different beast. And I would say, like, I'm so glad you're so confident. Um, let's make sure. Let's find out, and in an unbiased in an unbiased way, and then build a plan to include that person. That's in those situations that's most important for that stakeholder to be involved. Um, the more UX mature the company is, I think the less pushback you're going to get.
Yes.
Um, but that's where I would start. I would start by doing my own little kind of internal research by understanding truly where the pushback is. It might be we've never done it that way before, And there's no right or wrong or better or worse or whatever, but I would identify what that, barrier is, and then address that barrier.
Yeah, it could even, like you said, it could be a fear of change. Like we've been successful this long and we didn't do this UX research, or I've heard from some companies I've heard worked with, well, we've been successful for 20 years and our BAs are asking people questions. So why do we need these UX researchers?
Exactly. Or we know our customers is always, that's a popular one.
Yes.
Um, and you know what, there's, a certain argument that you can have for each, but my approach is not to argue in these. It's a real perception that exists, so identify, and nail down what that perception is, and then have a dialogue and build a plan that addresses that perception and include that person along the way, or not.
Right.
Maybe they don't want to be included, but
Right. Try to.
yes, definitely. It's a team sport it will be stronger as a result, of other stakeholder involvement and perspectives. Absolutely.
Great. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, because that's always a curveball. Pretty much everywhere most of us work is like, what research? Because one thing that I want to debunk is between books I read and Medium articles and all the junk that's out there, you often see, well, UX research is bloated and it takes 6 weeks and it's expensive. And I love that you just said there's things I can do in 48 hours. And I tell that to clients too. There's things I can do in half a day, 2 days. Like not everything is 6 weeks and a gazillion dollars. I want to make sure everyone listening knows there is a huge spectrum of methods available to us that let us be strategically pick the right thing.
Yeah, I I teach all of the in-person standalone user research classes at General Assembly in San Francisco, as you know. And for my 2 intro classes, I have literally a 5-minute usability study that we do at the onset to just level set. And what I do is I split the classroom in half and pair off students in 2, and one student is given a set of instructions of how to make an origami giraffe, and they are the maker, and the other student is the observer, and the maker has to try to make this origami giraffe. These are actual instructions downloaded off the internet, and the observer has to write down exactly what they see, exactly what they hear, exactly, they have to listen and observe and use those combination of skills while the maker talks out loud. And the instructions are not very, very good. So it creates a frustrating experience. And then at the end of that 5 minutes, literally a timer goes off and we have a huge class discussion about usability testing and what did you learn? And that usability testing doesn't have to require a lot of technology. It doesn't have to require a lot of time. It doesn't have to require anything fancy or any money, but even just the power of observation for 5 minutes. And then we talk about, all of the ways that those instructions could be improved and all of the information gathered in 5 minutes and how powerful that is. So I absolutely agree with you. It does not have to be lengthy. It doesn't have to be costly. It doesn't have to require fancy technology. There are very lightweight ways, to gather information to make more informed decisions.
Yeah, because there's a book I won't name that people know I'm not a fan of that pretty much says, UX research can be time consuming and expensive. So you don't want to give it to specialists. You want to kind of cut it down and just split it up amongst the whole team and have everybody on the cross functional team doing bits of research. Or this book also promotes guessing and assuming in places because you'll figure out later if you were right. Where do you stand on the guessing and assuming to save time thing?
I think assumptions are a great place to start. If you are unclear on what your research question is, I think it's a great way to hone in and identify that question. But assumptions are not facts. And when they are interpreted as facts, that can be very, very dangerous. So I would say, gather your stakeholders in the room. Like, let's identify what our assumptions are about why this isn't working, or what our users are thinking, or what the challenges or roadblocks might be, and come at it with those different perspectives. Again, your developer has a very beautiful mind that's very different from the product manager, is very different from the researcher, is very different from the content strategist, from the researcher. Like, get those beautiful minds together and just hammer out your assumptions. Just get them out, and use that as a starting point. But don't treat them as facts. That's very dangerous.
I'm with you. You knew that. So just a reminder to everybody, we are live. If you are joining us in YouTube or LinkedIn Live today, please ask any questions you have. I've got a few more I've got for Michele, but we welcome live questions as well. Just remember there's about a 60-second delay, so I'll get to your question as soon as I see it. So thinking about, I feel like one of the core things that can go wrong in research, especially when people who are new to it or not expert in it try to do it, is they don't ask the right questions. And I'll give you a humorous example. I had a potential client that we were potentially going to do research for, and they had written out some questions they wanted asked. And this was for a medical device they were thinking of inventing. And we were going to be speaking to medical professionals. And one of their questions was, should you wash your hands before you see a patient? And I call these questions from a commercial from your childhood and my childhood, where a guy looks at the TV and he goes, "Is a cat's urinary tract health important?" And I call these questions like, yes, only if you want your cat to live. Like, I don't understand, why are we asking that question, or why are we asking questions that wouldn't later affect a choice we make or something we architect or design. So there's a lot of, oh, and famous terrible question. We worked hard on this design. Do you find it intuitive?
Um, so I get a lot of questions about how to ask good questions.
Yeah.
I think that's an art to hone over time as well. I do have a whole teaching tool about bias. It's not on the website for download now, but if anybody wants to email and request that, like through the feedback, I'm glad to send that in. I tend not to. I suggest people don't ask any questions that A, aren't actionable, or B, aren't tied to the research goals, even in your softball questions. So a good kind of framework, if you will, is to follow the story arc of the interview. And every interview will have something similar, where you have a couple of warm-up kind of softball questions, and then a couple of digging deeper types of questions, and then a couple of wrap up and affirmation types of questions. And there is a tool on my website called participant question starters. And that, maps out not only those three pillars, but some alternative pillars like in between, if it's task-based usability or if they're Likert scale questions. But you want to follow that cadence. Choose 2 or 3 warm-ups, 5 or 6 kind of digging deeper, and 2 or 3 wrap-ups. And then all the questions in there are screened for bias. So they won't be leading. I think it's hard to get to a point where you can naturally or intuitively identify what a good question is, or how a question could be better. And that's one of the things that kind of takes time or practice. But also, understanding the difference between binary or closed-ended questions versus open-ended questions is going to yield a very different response, and they should be used differently. So maybe binary questions in the beginning, yes, no, kind of one answer questions, and digging deeper questions kind of in the meat of it while you're exploring like your main topic, and then binary questions again to kind of confirm or affirm that what you think you heard was correct.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what I think we're both saying about, I find some people, especially when they're new to this, they think they have to ask a lot of demographic questions, like, are you a homeowner? Or, how old are you? And I just try to remind people, and again, I'm not the expert that you are, but from my perspective, I try to remind people, if it doesn't affect a decision later, or it's not directly related to some of the strategic things that we're shooting for, or if it wouldn't change how you design or architect later, you don't have to know it. Like I saw someone
Right.
do a persona recently and they were like, well, this person's black and this person's multiracial and this person's white. And I'm like, newsflash, I don't design differently for black and white people.
Right. I think that's kind of a carryover and a confusion from market research.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sorry about that. I'm with you. The traditional demographics aren't as helpful as attitudes and behaviors. And when I'm segmenting my audience, I'm typically far more interested in attitudes and behaviors. How do they think about something, or how do they behave with something? Do they enjoy food shopping? How many times a week do they food shop? But if I'm designing, a new food box delivery service, those questions are far more important to me than age or income, assuming they have, disposable income and they're over 18. Either way, if the questions are important, they should have been addressed in the screener, and they shouldn't make it to the interview, or they shouldn't make it to the actual study, assuming it's not a survey, because they should have been screened in or screened out based on that required criteria before they got to that point.
Okay, that makes sense. And I just refreshed LinkedIn and found that people have been asking questions. And so there's some are just saying hi to each other. But I have a question here. What are the best research techniques which you follow? This is the person writing it. Hello, Rajesh. I use design sprint for validating an idea, but when it comes to pre-sprint research, I feel like there is so much handy research methods other than interviews and user journey maps. Any suggestions for Rajesh?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very collaborative, so I like to assess the culture of my clients' environment and find out what's going to be most culturally relevant there. It might be a 5-day design sprint. It might be, like a daisy chain series of studies. Um, I want to work in a way that is going to move us absolutely as closely as possible to action. And so I'm going to do my own like little research first to find out what's going to be culturally relevant in that area. I don't necessarily have like a go-to. It's more important to me that it's going to be meaningful for, the client that I'm doing research for.
Yeah, it's always about being strategic and selecting the right things for the project, the client,
The
probably the
timeline,
timing,
the budget.
budget. Yeah, all these things. So going back to interviews, we talked about finding some better questions to ask. So what are some what about my internet is unstable. I'll let you answer that one.
Actually, if you could repeat the question, there was a pause.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Airport Wi-Fi. I was saying that in addition to trying to know what are the right questions and wrong questions to ask, and you've got some tools and materials that we can learn from, how do we know by the end of the interview if that went well or badly? I mean, sometimes we kind of do. You ever throw out an interview because it really went very badly?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of. Let me answer that in a positive way first. I always suggest that people pilot their studies, whether they're interviews or unmoderated usability tests or cart whatever. I strongly suggest that people pilot every single possible thing about a study before they actually launch it live, including their note-taking strategy, how they're going to interact with their stakeholders, the guide, everything, the technology, the prototype, everything. Pilot, pilot, pilot. That in and of itself will help you identify many, many areas and opportunities to improve before you actually, go live, if you will, with your actual study. Um, the second, yeah, I have, thrown out some interviews. Um, Sometimes um, a participant sneaks through a screener that really isn't qualified. Um, Sometimes, more often than throwing out something, something doesn't work. So I've had interviews where in the middle I've had power failures.
Ooh.
I've had interviews, sometimes a participant shows up and they don't have the right device. So you're particularly recruiting them to show up with a laptop with a webcam so that we can, see each other just like this. And then they log in on a device that doesn't have a webcam. That would be another instance. I do teach this class called The Art of the Interview, or The Art of Conducting User Research Interviews. And in there, I have a whole moderator evaluation checklist where it actually sets the goalposts for what a good interview and a good moderator does during an interview. So you can actually evaluate yourself or another moderator's performance. And I suggest that my students do that in 3 different ways. They conduct an interview, they pin themselves to the Zoom recording so that they are fixed, the whole time during the interview. And then they watch it 3 different times. They watch it with audio and video and complete this check sheet. They turn off the video and just listen to the audio and complete the check sheet, and then do it the opposite. They turn off the audio and watch them only the video. And it's unbearable. I mean, it's awful, but you will learn so much about your own performance and your own delivery and how to improve it. It's life-changing.
Right, because you might be making faces you didn't know you were making,
Absolutely.
which the person might react to, or could make you look biased, or you're showing that you're biased. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's a real art to remaining neutral in these situations that a lot of people don't even know you're supposed to do. If you're new to research, you might not know you're supposed to be exceedingly neutral. And you might think that it's what you really want to do is agree with the person and agree with the person and agree with the person. Do you have, one researcher I used to work with, he had some great neutral phrases that he used a lot that I kind of picked up, which if someone said something really wild and off the charts or whatever, he would just say, I'll make a note of that and bring it back to the team.
Yes, that's a great one. Another one is tell me more, or that's really interesting. I'd love to hear more about that. Or when was the last time that happened? Or could you provide me with a little bit more context so I can understand? And all of those ways, bias may be, introduced not only, through a response, a verbal response, but, to your point, it might be in my, oh my God, my, wow, did they just say that out loud? Or in the way I, make a comment to a coworker. And that's by watching yourself actually go through this process, or even your gestures, like, that's amazing. That's what I would pick too. Um, another kind of, semi tangent here, but if you're testing concepts, if you're testing 2 or 3 concepts, you want to make sure you randomize the order in which you're presenting those concepts. You'll always receive more feedback on the first concept you present. So in order to eliminate bias, and again, your bias might be introduced in the sequence you're presenting the concepts, or the fidelity of the concepts as well. You want to make sure that they're all the same fidelity. But yeah, lots of ways to improve that. It's an art, and again, I think that's something that is developed over time and practice.
Great. Thank you. Let me check the notes and see if there's something else we're going to talk about. Oh, yeah, conducting solid interviews. Any other tips or advice on how to make sure you've done a really good, thorough, appropriate interview?
I think this moderator checklist would be really helpful. It actually like establishes what the goalpost is and then helps you evaluate it. I would thoroughly recommend going through that in a pilot interview. By piloting it's like a dress rehearsal, right? By piloting, everything possible about your study in real time, you're going to be able to identify so many different aspects, from whether or not your questions are intuitive, to whether they contain jargon, to do they fit, are they right sized for the length of the session time, are they in the right sequence, Is everything functioning properly? So I would say conduct a pilot interview and go through this, evaluation of yourself or of the moderator are two of the best tips I could ever offer.
And let me also ask another question from the perspective of someone who might be very new, which is I think sometimes people are confused when it comes to that collaboration. They might think, well, I'm going to do an interview, so I'll bring into the room the product manager and an engineer, and everyone's going to be there. What are some best practices with respect to who's in the room, who's watching it later on a video, or who's on the other side of a one-way mirror? How many people is the max that we put in the room with that participant?
So I think there's a slight difference between whether we're conducting an ethnography and we're in the field versus we're doing maybe a live interview in a maybe a more of a corporate setting. In more of a corporate setting, I prefer no more than one other colleague. In an ethnography, it's often two. And the reason why we don't want too many people there is because it can be intimidating. And we want to set up our participant for success. We want to make them feel as comfortable as possible. And by having too many other people there, it's kind of, you feel like I would imagine you would feel like kind of like a lab rat. And that's the opposite feeling of what we're, trying to create. So I would say a little bit of a difference in terms of what kind of study we're doing, but generally I prefer no more than one person in the room. When I'm scheduling my studies, I schedule a second room for observation. And then when I'm in the field, it's probably two other people. And when you're in the field, you never want to go alone, ever. So at least one other person for safety's sake.
Sorry, I was muted. More airplanes driving by. And then would you say that it's best for just the one key researcher to ask the questions, or can other people in the room ask the questions as well? Like if someone says, "Oh, wait, I have a question," and it's not one that you've talked about before, is it okay to have someone ask a spontaneous question, or should they go through like you or the key researcher?
So this is something that should be covered in the pilot also and with your stakeholders. So what I find works best and what I suggest is I let the participant know if it's a remote study that I may have colleagues join during the call. And at the end, I will ask them if they have any other questions and to hold their questions. Now, that being said, if I have a lot of observers from my client team, what I'll do is I'll have one point person create a Slack channel or maybe a text channel so that they can feed questions through my point person. So I'm
Some
not
sort of back
bombarded.
channel.
Yes,
Great.
I'm not bombarded by multiple people. And then that point person also knows the discussion guide very well and has participated in that pilot. So he or she has a really good sense of whether that question is going to come up later. And as we go through the sessions, they also get a better sense of my style and how I approach things and whether or not I'm going to get to it. So they're kind of like my gatekeeper, if you will. Um, if I'm conducting a remote study, I don't mind having two other people in the room and they can just kind of pass me notes. The more they're interacting with me, the more engaged they are. Again, in my experience, the more successful I think that study is going to be. I want them to engage with me. I want them to be thinking and processing and marinating as we go. I want them to get the information that's going to be meaningful for them.
Great.
I absolutely encourage that. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for helping us find the balance there.
Yeah.
So, and again, we're live. If anybody has any other questions, you can ask them in YouTube or in LinkedIn. I've got one more question that we thought about for Michele, and that is, okay, now you've done the research, it's time to put together a report or deliver the learnings in some way. What are
Mhm.
some good formats and maybe some do's and don'ts?
Okay, so again, I'm going to try to present whatever the learnings are in a way that's going to be culturally relevant to that team. So sometimes, and by the way, all of this should have been decided upon in the research plan and in the scope of work, right? Because you need to identify what kinds of artifacts you're going to collect and report on. You need to allot for the time associated to collect these and compile them, et cetera. So this should all be determined upfront before you start your research. Sometimes it might be a very simple top line report. Sometimes it might
Does
be
that mean you're
say.
sorry, we have a delay. Must be my internet again. I was asking, does that mean you might give a different report to, say, a product manager than you give to an engineering lead?
Not necessarily within the client team, but client A versus client B versus client C, or team A versus team B versus team C. What I have done in the past is I have organized the learnings according to what we were setting out to learn, but found that it would be more actionable if I also bifurcated those by team. So here were considerations for marketing, here were considerations for product, here were considerations for support or content or whatever, the teams are. So it would just, again, move them into action that much more quickly. But to your earlier question, no, what I meant more was a top line report might be more helpful, more actionable to company A, and company B might be more of like a formal presentation driven culture where it might be a multiple page deck. Sometimes they might want video clips or highlight reels or key quotes. That might be more meaningful to them. Sometimes it might be like a mini museum. So I'm going to propose something that's going to be most relevant to them.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions for Michele? I don't see any new questions, but there is a delay, and obviously my Wi-Fi is a little funky. Thank you for your patience. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about today for planning, research, and testing that we haven't covered yet?
I encourage you to ask questions. Asking questions, even if they're not the best questions, is a place to start. And we all have to start somewhere. There's lots of tools and resources out there. Definitely a big tip. Make sure that before you follow something or you try something, try to understand if it's a reliable source. I'm a part of many Slack groups and Facebook groups, and sometimes I see that the advice that's given from one person to another, is really not sound advice, or I can tell it's not coming from someone who's experienced. So
Right.
careful
I-
there.
Is there this is a question from me. Let's say you're working with a company and they have some non-UX people who are trying to do a little bit of research, like a product manager or a BA, and you find that they're asking bad questions or leading questions. Have you found a good delicate way to say to that person, that's not a good question? Because I found that when I've tried to say that to people, and obviously I might not get it right the first time myself, they were immediately defensive. So obviously I didn't do the best job saying it. Is there a good way to say that where you find people are a little less likely to get defensive and maybe more likely to take it well?
Are you talking about if I offer unsolicited advice, or
Maybe,
is this
yes, like,
solicited?
hey, you're asking this question and it's really not a good question to ask. So I guess that is unsolicited advice.
Um, I would maybe approach it a little bit more delicately and say, I'm a professional user researcher. This is what I do. Would you like some feedback? So I'd probably try to gain the permission first, versus dive in and say, this isn't a good question or a bad question. And then if the question contained bias or whatever was wrong with the question, I might say, the reason this question concerns me is because it contains something that we call bias. And that's that the way it's phrased or what's being presented or whatever the situation is, will likely lead someone to answer or respond in a specific way. And that will color our results. And what we're after as researchers, and what I think you're probably after is, a genuine understanding of XYZ. And a better way to go about that might be to rephrase it like this. We, and see what their response was. If they wanted to know more, then I can tell them like what kind of bias it was and how to kind of what questions to ask themselves in the future and give them a teaching tool or whatever. But I would first seek permission, to offer unsolicited feedback, and then try to provide some context around it. It's a very common kind of, I don't want to say rookie, like in a negative way, but it's a very common like beginner's mistake, and it takes a lot of practice and time to again be able to identify those questions and ask questions in the right way.
Yeah, I'm going to throw another one at you just because we don't have questions coming in from the listeners. Though, if you guys have them, ask them now because we're going to wind down soon. But I've been doing some UX research around people who have had negative experience with trade schools and boot camps. And when I had posted some of the things that I had learned on LinkedIn, obviously there are some people with horses in the race related to boot camps, and so they don't like that I'm shooting some pellet guns at them. But one person was like, well, that's just anecdotal. Is there a is do you see a difference between things I learned because of user research where someone gave me information and that's an anecdote? Because I think the person who said that maybe couldn't differentiate between the two and saw my research as anecdotal. Is there some way I could have presented it better so it wouldn't have seemed easily dismissible and anecdotal?
Could you put it more into context for me? So
Yeah, so obviously I had from doing research with people who had poor experiences with boot camps, I had a lot of information and details about what those people what their bad experiences were, what their expectations were versus what their reality was. I had a lot of information around. I'd asked people what they had researched before they chose the boot camp that they did, and I learned that there was almost very few people did research. Many people just loved the pitch and loved the deal and went for it. And when I tried to present these things, there were a couple of people who reacted negatively on LinkedIn, like, oh, I don't believe this. I don't believe that people didn't research. We're researchers at heart, and this just sounds anecdotal. And so it just seemed like I don't know if they were just using that word to try to cut down what I had done, but do you ever find there's some way to present things that makes people think less of it? Like, could I have changed the way I presented it? I know you didn't see how I presented it.
would be used and the business goals. And I think it's always important, whether you're doing research for yourself or a client, um, to include both positive and negative feedback if you can. All positive feedback isn't, particularly helpful.
Right.
Uh, and all negative feedback isn't particularly helpful either. So I strive to um, uncover a balance and report on a balance. And I have found that if I can get to that balance, it's more likely well received as appropriate's not the right word.
No,
Uh,
what you're saying makes total sense. That there's something about that balance that might make the research either more believable or palatable because it wasn't one shade or the other.
and I would also try to keep in mind that maybe the people you were sharing this with didn't have the context, or the context wasn't set appropriately. What were you setting out to learn? Why did you want to learn this? How will the learnings be used? Who did you talk to? What was their criteria? What was the method I think so much of it is context setting. um and the kind of the biggest is like who who are the end users, or who did you design the study for? My gut says you probably didn't design the study for the person that's giving you that feedback. If that person's giving you that feedback, it's clear that that person wasn't involved in the process. So, to bring this full circle, what are you looking to learn, and how will those learnings be applied? It's really important to have those stakeholders in the room at the onset. So my
Yeah, this
hypothesis
was just
is
a
that
LinkedIn random, so they weren't technically a stakeholder. They were a boot camp grad who had a good experience, and so they didn't like that I was talking about people who had neutral to bad experiences. We have a real question in the room, so I'll get off my own question here. What is the best way to present data to people who need to see it? Infographics versus written, or are there some other better ways?
what is the best way to present data?
Yeah.
Was the question? Um, so I'm a little confused at what format of data we're talking about. Are we talking about like visual artifacts that are collected? Are we talking about drawings? Are we talking about screenshots? Are we talking about literal notes?
Yeah,
Um,
so it sounds like the answer is the best way to present data is going to vary based on what it is.
and also, who are your stakeholders, right? So, to your stakeholders, people have different learning preferences, right? Some people prefer and consume information better through storytelling, others through visuals, others, through graphs. Actually spoke at a data visualization event last week. It was very interesting. We had 4 researchers and an example of how we uniquely present data. But I'd go back to that original question is who are your stakeholders and what's going to be most meaningful and relevant to them?
Right. And that's something you can only learn through conversation and collaboration.
That's right. And then right size it for the scope of the project. Um, and whether it's qual or quant is also going to, have some sort of input on how that data gets visualized.
I think we've got time for one more question, and Faith's got a big one. Faith asks, what is your approach on how to present UX research to a team that's never heard of it? And you're trying to heavily convince them to use it on the future projects.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So, what has worked for me earlier, I mentioned this literally this 5-minute usability study that I do in my intro to UX research classes. And feel free to email me and I'll go ahead and send you those. It's a 1-page sheet. And I find to get them involved absolutely positively as quickly as possible in a way that they can see black and white concrete benefits themselves in a very short period of time has been enormously successful. It's been successful in terms of establishing what it is and what it isn't, demonstrating that it doesn't require a lot of technology or time or money, and that it is, something as simple as observation, can be extremely powerful. So that's been
Great,
very
great idea.
successful for me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great to bring that from your training and your workshops right into your workplace and do it with your coworkers or team or stakeholders and just say, look, this, and I do this in some of my talks. I do a 10-minute tree test, and I say, if this is what we can do in 10 minutes,
Right.
and do a quick tree test and a quick analysis of it, but it could change the path of a project. It could keep us from making further mistakes or blaming the customer.
Right.
um, so anything else that you can think of, and maybe there isn't, that can also help someone kind of sell research or show the value of it before it's happened?
Um, you know, I think that it's roll up your sleeves and do the best you can. Maybe ask why not, and try to be open minded and start where you are. There's no other place. If there's no other place to go, then just start where you are now, and see if you can diagnose what the barriers are in your organization to do it. Leverage your personal development dollars. Invest in yourself. One of the things that I hear most from my students are, I want to learn how to conduct user research. I want to be upskill, in that area because it will help me do better in my job and it will help me feel more confident about the decisions that I'm making on a day-to-day basis. It will help me in my career. It will help me progress. So I say invest in yourself. And if your
Yeah.
company isn't willing to, do research, or if your company isn't willing to invest in this way, then maybe ask yourself if this is the right culture for you. Ask
Right.
yourself if this is the right culture. Is this a UX mature company, is this company going to help support you and where you want to go? And maybe it's not. And I actually,
Right.
my last newsletter covered that specific topic. If anybody wants to read that, it's about UX maturity and evaluating, where you fit into that.
Great. So let's wrap up and let's just tell everybody where they can find you. So again, you are Michele with one L, Ronsen, Rons, as in Sierra, En, just for people not looking at the video, because I send these out to podcasts later without the video. They can find you on LinkedIn. I think you said the new site is Curiosity Stream?
Curiosity Tank.
Sorry, Curiosity Tank. Curiosity Stream is I saw an ad on YouTube the other day. They sponsored something I
No
was
worries.
watching. Sorry. Curiosity Tank.com and Michelle's going to have her coaching and her videos and her courses there. So I make no money from this. I just like to support Michele. So please check out her stuff. She's obviously one of the good ones out there, and you can definitely learn from her. She's got a lot of really deep dives into UX research. If you really want to learn it deeply, you might want to learn it from her. So check out her stuff, join her mailing list. Anything else you want to add?
Thank you for having me. The newsletter is called Fuel Your Curiosity, and I just appreciate the opportunity. So thank you for inviting me back.
Yes, someone in the room said Curiosity Stream is a Discovery Channel website. Sorry, wrong one. That was just in my head from a video I watched the other day. So thanks again to Michele. And don't forget, you can find me on LinkedIn. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, which I've got a short link now at deltacx.tv. Will take you to the YouTube channel. Please subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we're live. And guys, for March, I have a live stream planned almost every weekday of the entire month. So go to the Delta CX website, deltacx.com. Under events, you'll find live stream podcasts, and check out the Google Calendar to see all the stuff that is coming up for our office hours, our live stream podcasts, our improv comedy, our new UX job speed dating. There's something going on almost every day. Yeah, so someone's posted your link to the LinkedIn chat, curiositytank.com. Don't listen to me. And I'm going to wind down for now. And thanks to everybody for joining.
Thanks, Debbie. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.